Shortly after, a Russia-sponsored humanitarian pause came into force in Syria's eastern Ghouta, the U.S. State Department slung accusations at Moscow and the Syrian government.
Russia is certainly not adhering to the ceasefire. They're not adhering to the ceasefire because they continue to sponsor and back Bashar al-Assad's government.
Violence in the rebel and terrorists-held Damascus suburb escalated earlier this month, with both sides accusing each other of targeting civilians. The UN Security Council unanimously adopted a month-long ceasefire resolution across the country. Additionally, Russia has also sponsored a 5-hour daily truce to help civilians escape the violence in eastern Ghouta. However, terrorists shelled the humanitarian corridor that was set up for this. That's according to Russia's defense ministry, which had helped establish the route before it was attacked just minutes later. Not a single civilian was able to leave the enclave on Tuesday. With the Russia-sponsored truce now into its second day, Russia's top diplomat has stressed that militants are still disrupting the humanitarian operation.
The militants entrenched in Ghouta continue to shell Damascus, preventing aid deliveries and the evacuation of people who want to leave. We call on the members of the so-called American coalition to ensure the same humanitarian access to areas in Syria under their control, including the Rukban refugee camp and the entire territory surrounding Al-Tanf.
Well, comparisons are now being drawn between the ongoing liberation of eastern Ghouta and the former militant enclave of Aleppo in 2016. RT's Igor Zhdanov takes a closer look.
The tangle of violence in East Ghouta is morphing into Aleppo 2.0. Watching the mainstream media's coverage is almost like traveling in a time machine back to 2016.
President Assad and his Russian ally are accused of unleashing all-out war against the people of Ghouta.
Russia and the Syrian government are launching an offensive.
Assad's army has fired hundreds of missiles and mortars on civilian homes and hospitals.
Hospitals are targets in Syria, and the regime has been bombing them ruthlessly.
Among all things, East Ghouta is one of the last jihadi bastions. Just like Aleppo, it's been a long-time den of the Nusra Front and the likes. Here's the terrorists' flag hanging off the wall during a meeting in East Ghouta a few years ago. And since then, Nusra and its allies have only been getting cozier there. Militias in East Ghouta have a record of forcing civilians to sit tight amid the fighting. And the worse it is for them, the better.
The evidence indicates that non-state armed groups in eastern Ghouta, and in particular Jaish al-Islam, are also responsible for inflating the price of food and other basic necessities there, arbitrarily restricting the movement of civilians wishing to leave, and abducting and arbitrarily detaining people.
Human shields is a tactic favored by all terrorists, including those who were in Aleppo. Hardly a surprise that minutes after Russia and Syria opened humanitarian corridors out of East Ghouta, those paths to safety came under rebel shelling.
Humanitarian corridors for the passage of civilians are still blocked by terrorists and being shelled. Militants continue to use mortars and rocket systems against residential neighborhoods, including areas with humanitarian corridors in the western part of Aleppo.
And just like in East Aleppo, there are no Western reporters in rebel-held Ghouta. After all, with those groups, you never know what you're going to get, a story or a price on your head. Instead, reporters' shoes are filled by young prodigies.
Stand with Aleppo and in the siege.
This is what happens to the Shenra, the country seat of Damascus, and especially in eastern Ghouta for 7 years ago by the terrorist Assad regime.
The White Helmets, a group marketing itself as a civil defense initiative. Their volunteers work at bomb sites as diligently, it seems, as they have at the scenes of jihadist executions. Wherever jihadi factions fester, they bring the White Helmets in tow. East Ghouta, like Aleppo, is no exception. Whether it's Ghouta, Aleppo, or any other hotbed of violence, it's almost never just black or white. But sticking a good versus bad label is so much easier, especially when you have some stored away from the last time. Igor Zhdanov, RT.
The British Foreign Office invited the Russian ambassador to the UK, Alexander Yakovenko, to discuss the humanitarian situation in eastern Ghouta. He told us that finding a solution to the crisis is a joint responsibility.
The United Nations is waiting to send the humanitarian aid to eastern Ghouta, but how to get it there? Because, for example, the routes are full of mines, you cannot go there. The terrorists are holding as a life shield the people, they're not letting them out. So we discussed with the British, what the British could do in practical terms and what kind of signals they could send to whether it's a military opposition or whatever, to the armed people in order to save lives. We need the British on board, but we don't accept the statements like that the Russians are guilty for the humanitarian situation. We're on the same boat. We're trying to do our best in order to release Syria from the terrorists.